Zoetis is a big pharma company many may not have heard of. However, a company that has become one of the most essential organizations over the past couple of decades. Today, we're going to explore this drug maker and how it's been saving the countless lives of our furry and not so furry friends for decades. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Dollars and Cents, helping you make sense of making dollars. In order to get an idea of the history of Zoetis, we have to look at an unlikely company. Pfizer. In the 1950s, John McKeen, a chemical researcher for Pfizer, discovered that the drug Oxytetracycline prevented all sorts of diseases in livestock. With this discovery, Pfizer pumped more money into this area of research and created Pfizer Animal Health in 1988. Soon, the company acquired Bovigen and Ventex Animal Health, among others. In 2012, Pfizer announced that Pfizer Animal Health, renamed Zoetis, would spin off into its own public company to help Pfizer reduce debt and save on costs. Since its inception, Zoetis has developed and continues to develop over 30 different areas of animal care, including vaccines and different types of treatments for various diseases. This expansion and development made Zoetis the largest animal care provider in the world, with a market cap of over $100 billion. With that said, let's take some time to examine this unusual pharma giant's financial health. Of course, we have to start off with revenue growth. In 2015, Zoetis pulled in an impressive $4.76 billion, but by the close of 2020, it had pulled in $6.68 billion. This means that Zoetis is off to a strong start with nearly 50% revenue growth in just 5 years. Next up is shares outstanding. Zoetis is buying back shares, just not a lot of them. In 2015, the company had 499.71 million shares outstanding against 475.5 million in 2020. That's roughly a 5% drop in, again, 5 years. Following that is free cash flow growth. This is essentially cash in, cash out, a simple metric to determine how the company is doing with its excess cash. In 2015, Zoetis had $440 million in free cash flow. In 2020, this number soared to $1.67 billion, nearly quadruple what it had, and on just 50% revenue growth. Zoetis also shines in current assets versus current liabilities. Current assets total $6.79 billion against $2.07 in current liabilities. Big to note is that Zoetis also has $3.6 billion in cash on hand. That means Zoetis can pay off all short-term debts if it wanted to. Now we run into our first hiccup, valuation. If you take the average of the free cash flow over the last 5 years and multiply it by 20, you get an expected market cap of $24.4 billion. We already said that its current market cap nears $100 billion, so from a free cash flow standpoint, Zoetis is fairly overvalued. After this, we have to look at Zoetis' 5-year return on invested capital. Right now, it stands at a solid 10.7%. Last year, however, ROIC came in right around 15%, which is expected given last year's impressive numbers. Lastly, let's examine the dividends that Zoetis pays. Right now, they don't pay a lot in dividends, but the company is growing them quickly. As it stands, the company's dividend yield is 0.4%, equating to 25 cents per quarter or $1 per share per year. Zoetis' payout ratio stands at an impressive 21.96%, giving them lots of room to grow their dividend. And grow their dividend they have, by 21.69% on average over the last 5 years. I anticipate one day that Zoetis will become attractive for its dividends alone, much like the other big pharma companies. All that said about its financial health, it's time for us to dig deeper into why Zoetis is doing so well. I think it starts mostly with the vast array of animal care products that Zoetis has developed and is developing. As previously stated, Zoetis has a lot of FDA-approved drugs for animals. This is especially interesting because of how the animal drug system works. In the US, human drug companies develop drugs that apply for patents that usually last 20 years. When that 20 years is up, other companies can make generic versions pending FDA approval and sell it, usually at a massive discount. This same process applies to the animal drug world too. The biggest difference is that the market for generic animal drugs isn't nearly as large. Because of the market size, the biggest animal drug makers have a stronghold on the industry and employ independent authorized distributors to work directly with veterinarians medications, and animal hospitals. A lot of times, vet offices and animal hospitals will enter agreements with these large companies like Zoetis, restricting access to and for generic makers. On top of that, these companies also advocate for only allowing vet offices and hospitals that enter these agreements to dispense these often life-saving treatments. These practices, combined with a smaller market, have solidified Zoetis' position as the market leader for animal drug manufacturing. It dominates 4 of the 5 major fields, including companion animals, aka pets, cattle, swine, and fish. The area of poultry is the only one that Zoetis lags in, standing at number 3. This leads to my next point: Zoetis' ability to produce quote-unquote blockbuster products with incredible consistency. Looking here, we see a few of the many innovative treatments developed by Zoetis. Each of these blockbuster drugs brings in over $100 million in revenue. These aren't even the company's biggest drugs either. Switching over to this other side, we see a variety of products, and how long each of them have been on the market. Each name here represents 1% of their $6 billion in revenue last year. Something generally important for most biopharma companies is a thing called pipeline. It generally determines how to value these biopharma companies. What is the company developing, how long will it take, and more importantly, how useful will this new drug be? In the past year, we saw huge run-ups from FDA approvals, with notable examples in Biogen and Novavax. However, this pipeline doesn't matter as much with Zoetis, because a lot of its revenue comes from breaking into new markets early and establishing business before other companies. Another large portion of Zoetis' revenue comes from its improvements to existing treatments too. Going back to this slide, we see that Zoetis has managed to put out over 1,100 products and improvements to those products over the last 5 years. While this does sound all well and good, there are some significant obstacles standing against Zoetis. One of the biggest obstacles is actually the rise of generics and companies that cater to these generics. Even though most medications are bought through veterinarians' offices, there is a large increase in both generic makers and the companies that cater to them. Companies like 1-800-PetMeds and Chewy are working hard to undermine the incredible system that Zoetis has built by offering many of these generics and general medications online. While Zoetis has somewhat of an online presence, it pales in comparison to the incredible online platforms Chewy and PetMeds. This is just one way the competition is knocking on the door though. Zoetis also faces serious competition from other animal drug makers. At this point, almost every major pharma company has a division working on medications for pets. From Merck & Co. to the Eli Lilly spinoff Elanco, and even Bayer's Animal Health segment. All of these drug makers have realized the incredible lucrative opportunity that animal health presents. For the record, this chart represents the increasing opportunity for these other companies. As more Americans adopt animals, there's an increasing need for medications. With this large increase in pet ownership comes another potential pitfall for Zoetis. While the pet medication segment of the business is growing tremendously, Zoetis' livestock segment only grew 2% last year. This gives room for other companies to creep up and dominate the livestock field. It's not necessarily a sign of bad things incoming, but this lack of growth in the livestock segment should serve as a reminder for Zoetis. Other companies will seize the opportunity to take advantage from Zoetis, even if it has a first mover advantage. And finally, remember how I mentioned the pipeline earlier, or that it's not really a concern for Zoetis because it makes money in new markets like Brazil and Mexico? Well, it certainly can become a problem for Zoetis. Generic makers and competitors are growing. They won't stay small forever. Zoetis is going to have to continue expanding its pipeline if it wants to compete with its eager competitors or the generic makers and their accessible platforms like Chewy and PetMeds. The old way of doing business isn't going to work forever, and its large share of the market won't stay that way either. If Zoetis cannot continue to develop these blockbuster drugs at the pace it has over the last few years, then the company will fall behind fast, and many of its patents are on the verge of expiration. Yet there is some life for Zoetis in this area. The company recently got FDA approval for its triple threat parasiticide treatment for companion animals, seemingly one of Zoetis' blockbusters. Plus, the company is developing several solid new drugs that could keep it one step ahead of its competitors, but only time will tell in the end. Overall, I think Zoetis is quite the company, run by people who are dedicated to making quality animal healthcare products. It's the largest company in its field, expanding into new markets, and is the dominating force in animal medicine, even though Zoetis faces steep competition from rivals and from generic makers creeping into the markets more and more. I believe that Zoetis is capable of remaining the dominator, especially if it can produce blockbuster products like it has in the past. It's even possible Zoetis may even challenge its former parent Pfizer in market cap one day. Of course, I could be wrong and Zoetis may not rise to the challenge, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. I hope you enjoyed this video on Zoetis. Leave your thoughts on the animal medication giant in the comments section, or have a conversation with me in the community in my Discord, link in the description. Until next time, I will see all of you in the next episode of Dollars and Cents.